Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this incredible dialogue with the none other than the mighty new Untouchables. This is the 38th episode, if you can believe it, guys, of these efforts to try to get people inside this incredible information you are willing to share with us week in and week out. And I have to say, like always, last week was no exception. This group is weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance of what really becomes basically the mainstream echo chamber, which blows my mind, and we'll get into it. But a couple of quick introductions first, everybody. We're recording this on Friday, September 5th, 2025, about 5 o'clock Eastern Time. To my immediate left is my colleague, Eric S. Vaughn from Red Point Digital, and he's also the face and the creator of Corruption Incorporated, The American Way. And you can find that on YouTube, and you can find that really all over social media. I'll have a link in the description. Immediately below him, at least on my camera, is none other than Paul Peltier, former Department of Justice veteran, as well as chief prosecutor, particularly in the arena of white collar fraud, not to mention global crime, and is now currently, in addition to being in private practice, also involved as a adjunct professor at George Washington University. And immediately below me is a man whose accolades are beyond the time that we have to introduce, but this is none other than William K. Black. William K. Black, most known for his incredible book and time period that preceded it, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, and of course, a PhD in economics, obviously an expert in law, as well as decades and decades
Terminology.
and criminology and regulations. And oh, I got it wrong because what did I say? You've got the PhD in criminology. I'm sorry. What is it in economics? What is your degree in economics?
From University of Michigan,
Okay.
undergraduate.
All right. Well, let's just put it this way. Somebody who's a hell of a lot smarter than I am. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm just simply the producer that was fortunate enough to try to bring everybody together. But as we're introducing this particular episode, obviously, like always, just unbelievable things. But I think I'm just going to read off just a couple of headlines in the New York Times to set the table first. But right away, we see that the jobs report undercuts Trump's claims of a booming economy, regardless of the fact that he obviously fired someone that a few weeks ago because he didn't like the numbers. Further down, we realize that the labor market stalled this summer, with August data showing obviously a slowdown. And then, interestingly enough, I found this yesterday to be, I think, pertinent and kind of ironic, all things the Trump administration. But all the biggest U.S. oil companies are eliminating thousands of jobs. That's interesting. But obviously, in context, we just realized that Navy SEAL Team 6 actually had a botched operation back in 2019 in the Bay of North Korea. I'm not sure what technically the name of where it was, but that's obviously incredible, considering that South Koreans were swept up today in an immigration raid in a Hyundai EV plant in Georgia, all things ICE. And of course, Chicago braces for an immigration crackdown. And I could go on and on, including, by the way, the fact that we had a frigate, a missile destroyer that took out what supposedly was a drug.
Boat.
Yeah, exactly. This week.
Well, you say it's a drug boat. I
Right,
guess.
right. We don't know, right? It just happened. But the last thing I want to introduce, just in terms of conversation, of course, is this amazing news, guys. Look, we've got this evolved information that Trump is going to use the Justice Department to investigate, and I said this publicly, a criminal investigation into Fed Board Governor Lisa Cook for mortgage fraud, which we discussed this last week. But this on top of the revelations from our friend Jesse Eisinger and the folks over at ProPublica, who've just released the revelation that many in Trump's cabinet have been doing the exact same thing. And I learned this past week that Governor Abbott and I guess his AG, Paxton, were also guilty of the exact same thing. And so I want to ask you, Bill, to kind of pick up there. I mean, I'm sure you got plenty to offer by way of this investigation and what it means and what the people need to understand.
Well, first, guilty may not be the right word at all, right? This is not prosecuted. It was, to my knowledge, not even made a criminal referral, and the standard for a criminal referral is, a reasonable suspicion, an articulable reason to investigate. So it's well below guilt, much less probable cause type of thing before you get to guilt, and then, beyond a reasonable doubt. So taking these things, which are almost never treated as crimes, and then claiming they're crimes, and then claiming with no proof that this indicates people should lose their jobs. This, as Paul and I have emphasized, is a violation of at least a half dozen places in the Justice Manual. But beyond that, you never do this, and you don't do it because you don't use the law to oppress people, right? And they are using the law as a weapon. The very thing they scream about, lawfare, is precisely what they do. And they don't bother to convict people because typically they have no ability to. I mean, you've seen they can't even get through probable cause with grand juries, multiple grand juries, right? They lose. They impanel a new grand jury, which, by the way, you can do. They lose again. They impanel a third grand jury. They lose again. They can't even do that. And it is, irony of all ironies, the classic line about, allegedly prosecutors could indict a sandwich because it was a sandwich. And it was like the weakest toss of a sandwich. Paul's there with a baseball. This would be a 6 mile an hour, nowhere near the plate. I was a catcher, by the way. So it is, in one sense, the theater of the absurd. But in the other sense, you can see that the only thing currently standing between us and dictatorship is their incompetence. That's unfair. Juries are actually working, in these cases. But it sure as hell isn't the Justice Department. They renamed, or are saying they want to rename defense as the War Department. They need to rename their Justice Department as the Injustice Department, and that would be too kind in all of these things. So again, there are economic studies about this in the great financial crisis. And what they find is this kind of occupancy designation was, their phrase of the economists was, common at all of the most reputable banks in America. I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty darn close to exactly their language. And instead, this is going to become an alleged felony, series of felonies, and be used selectively because they only searched, obviously, for Dems. And it goes along at the same time when they're refusing to enforce the law against massively greater fraud. And they're doing so because they're the ones committing the massively greater ripoffs, particularly in the crypto realm.
Paul, I hesitate to ask you a question because so much is going on. Will you just lead with where your mind is and what you want to address first?
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on what Bill just said with an example of what happened yesterday before Judge Zia Fariqui in the District of Columbia. So as you probably all know, the U.S. Attorney Jenny Pirro and the Trump administration are rounding up people and arresting people to say they did something. Of course, they're not arresting murderers. They're not arresting criminals that commit aggravated crimes or felonies. They're arresting people for all kinds of stuff. Well, a week ago, they arrested a number of people. And by the way, they tweet about it all the time. We're cleaning up the streets, but they're not. And so they arrested this guy named Dana. The guy was drunk. he broke a light, so they arrested him. And while they were arresting him, he was drunk, and he said he was a Russian agent, and he hated Nazis and fascists, and if in order to achieve his goals as a hater of fascists, he'd be willing to kill a president if that's what it took. So they arrested him for threatening the life of a president. All bullshit. And they dismissed the case yesterday. They dismissed it. Judge Farquhar went on a rant for 20 minutes. And I'm going to just quote some of what he said, because it's very pertinent to what Bill just said. We're past the point of constitutional crisis, he said. He said he feels embarrassment and shame for the government. He said this is just a rush to get on Twitter and Truth Social. He said the Trump administration is playing cops and robbers like children. He said, what's to prevent any people from just getting rounded up on the streets so they can have a better Twitter post? He said, the feds have time to collect stats and press releases, but where's the time for the people illegally detained? And he blasted the judgment for saying it's working out its kinks through just arresting innocent people. He said, and finally, he said the department's losing credit. He said it's not just that the department's losing credibility. He said we're way past that point, way past that point. And he said people like Mr. Dana are suffering the consequences. And he said that's why he was treating this motion all these motions dismiss as an issue of grave concern. He said there's way too many misfires. Finally, he said it's September 4th. As of now, we still have a constitutional democracy. So he was sending up the flares of what's going on with these people in this administration and this Department of Justice. And it's really concerning. And the good thing is he's a federal district judge and he's saying this publicly. And hopefully other people are listening and hearing it too. We have courts all across the country, particularly district courts, saying similar things. Where this goes, it's not a good place, but it just, the wheels are coming off. And when a judge says we have a constitutional democracy as of now, he's telegraphing that really bad things are coming if somebody doesn't do something. And I just throw that out there. That's a federal district court judge in DC talking.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in really quick, to me, it feels like the absurdity is the point, right? I mean, that by making things so absurd and by making it so that there's no real rhyme or reason as to why something might happen to you, that basically puts you in the vice grip of control. I mean, and I think that what both of you are talking about just seemed to me that's exactly to me what it feels like is happening. That the absurdity of everything, the fact that there's no way to kind of legally navigate these things. It's like if you're targeted, you're targeted. And there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. You know, after the fact, you might get off or something like that, but you still have to deal with it. The indignation of being picked up off the street for no reason whatsoever is in itself, I think, the end, right?
And Eric, as a prosecutor, we're the last line of defense to get in between agents wanting to arrest everybody, and I'm obviously overstating that and being a little bit facetious, and not letting that happen. And that line of defense is gone. When I was in Miami, we indicted and charged through grand jury more cases than the next top 7 districts combined. It was crazy. I'm in all my years in Miami, that was 15 years. I think we had one no true bill returned from a jury. One. In DC, it's happening with, as Bill said, with horrifying frequency.
So, Eric, I wanted to address you, considering the credibility that we have from obviously the wonderful folks that join us and lend their experience and their professionalism and their decades of being in the mix of this whole thing. But the the thing that I was struck by when I was listening to you add your response a couple of seconds ago is the fact that right behind you is Darth Vader. And I'm very well aware, of course, from our years of working together, obviously your inputs, but particularly as we've seen recently from the series Andor, right? But in real time, I mean, look, you and I have talked about this forever. I've always said corruption bursts and fuels fascism. It's the pattern, whatever, tyranny, yada, yada, yada. But we're literally, like I just said at the outset here, right? That we've got ICE. They went after employees at the Hyundai EV plant in Georgia. Okay, that's like a next level, right? I mean, we're talking about a major, country and one of their largest corporations, and they've got a situation where they've got a plant in Georgia, and now ICE is going after them. Now, interestingly enough, I've seen personally ads for ICE for youth. Come and you'll get your student loans paid. We know they've got a bigger budget than the Marines. There's this huge impetus for ICE and everything that they're carrying out. And of course, we've just seen what decisions come down. I mean, God, there's so many decisions come down from tariffs and, ICE on the streets. And you can't, I mean, across the board. But I mean, can you believe after everything that we've been in the midst of and everything that's influenced us, that this is happening in real time? And in the last part of this question, think about the credibility of Bill and Paul and everybody that joins us on these things. And yet they're telling us, it seems like we're closer to the line now. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I just want to get back to sort of like, yeah, I mean, just the oppressive nature of all this and the psychological effects that it has. I mean, earlier this week, I really had to fight against, feelings of like, I don't know. I took something very personally when they announced that they were going to be turning Fort Bliss into an ICE detention center just because Fort Bliss used to be an internment camp, right? And so, I mean, so I'm a descendant of somebody who died in an internment camp, right? And the majority of my ethnic makeup is like the group that is currently being targeted to be placed into these ICE detention centers. And so it really, it affected me. And I really had to like take a step back and say, I'm not going to let this get to me. I can't let this get to me because if I let it get to me, it's going to affect my ability to push back. It's going to affect my ability to do what I need to do, in these conversations and on the various different media that we're putting out. And I can't let it do that. But that's what these things are designed to do. They're designed to put us into a box and to make us feel like we can't do anything so that we won't do anything. That's the nature of control, and that's what I see,
Mm-hmm.
all of this as being. And I was rewatching Forward 13 fairly recently, and it's amazing the conversations that we hear, from the Occupy encampments and how there are conversations that could have been it could have been yesterday. I mean, the issues that are being brought up and the problems that people are expressing, were 100% the exact same thing back then and saying that this is what was going to happen. And here we are, they went from being predictions back in 2011 to basically being, you know, descriptions of 2025. And so, you know, these things aren't by accident. They're trying to get us from pushing back. And we have to remember that. And we have to never lose our minds over it. Keep control of ourselves so that we can push back with everything that we have. Um, so That's basically my little bit there is that we can't let them get to us,
Well,
and
and
that's
well
what all this
said.
stuff is designed to do.
And well said. But I mean, it's not like we didn't see this happen in Russia at the late 90s, and then of course, through the last 2 decades, right? And we kind of, it's just like paint by the numbers. And Bill, I want to bring this back to you though, just for some more clarification on the situation as it relates to, like you had brought up last week. I'm thinking of Bill Pulte, the Federal Housing Finance Agency director, and you had brought up, okay, the methodology of, wait a second, where did he get this information, and why is he targeting both, Senator, I'm thinking of what's his name from California. Why can't I think of his name at the moment? But obviously Lisa Cook, and then anyway, they're using these methodologies that you had addressed last week, and yet now we know from ProPublica that this is the epitome of everything that Trump does: lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. He's accusing these guys of what his own administration is also involved with, not to mention his allies down in Texas. Can you please address that a little further?
Sure. Let me start with the more basic and put together what Eric is saying with what Paul and I have been talking about. It isn't just that we've read history and lived history, that we know how a totalitarian government works. It works that way for logic, right? It's optimizing behavior. In fancier jargon, what Eric is talking about is signaling. They want to signal. And what they're signaling is basically two things simultaneously. One is we don't care. We don't care about the law. You referred to the Marines. My father was a Marine. Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. These people are never faithful to their oaths of office, right? And they want to signal that. They want to signal that there are no protections. ICE agents routinely lie, and so far without significant consequences other than having grand juries refuse to indict. But none of them are going to jail. None of them are being investigated. None of them are being prosecuted. The signal they send to the ICE agents is you can do damn near anything. And we will not only allow it, we will celebrate it. We will take a boat in the waters off a foreign country with no, I mean, that is not smuggling drugs. Look at the images. You know what drug smuggling looks like? You have packages everywhere on that kind of boat. There's just nothing visible that would make it a drug smuggling trip. They could have intercepted them. They've got U.S. naval assets, especially out there. The best electronic surveillance stuff in the world for locating vessels and tracking them. They chose, and I mean the President of the United States chose, with no trial, with no basis, to murder those people.
I'm glad you said murder, Bill, because that's exactly what that was.
I'm given to plain talk. Okay, but they're also signaling, because it's rational, hey, you want to make us rich, foreign countries, come on in. So think of how they set that up. What are among Trump's first actions to say we're not going to enforce the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act anymore? Foreign bribery. So you can come in and bribe my family, and the idiot ambassador or special representative to Russia, Wyckoff, who keeps doing these stupid things. His son is the crypto guy with the Trump family, right? There will be rewards. We will make all of us big folks extraordinarily wealthy, and I mean in the billions of dollars, with total impunity, and we will have simultaneously an acting head of the criminal division who absolutely is willing to turn a blind eye to the greatest corruption in U.S. history, the most blatant corruption in U.S. history, and use the law as a weapon against any political opponents. And they want to send the message, the signal. We don't have to have a valid case. We don't have to say, if Democrats go to jail for this, Republicans will go for jail for this. All that stuff is gone. In other words, the very thing that we heard incessantly, the deep state, they're creating. It's just kind of shallow. And it is out to both simultaneously enrich the Trump family and to produce this totalitarian state.
Absolutely. But Bill, a follow-up though, considering what ProPublica just gave us, we know that the hypocrisy is beyond comprehension. I'm talking about with the mortgage fraud, investigation and how that's being run. Can you run that down just slightly further because of just all of the elements?
Sure. There were, in the great financial crisis by 2005, there were over 1 million fraudulent loans made every year. This is a combination of liar's loans, which, as the name implies, involves the loan broker creating a fictional, highly inflated supposed income of the borrower. And then the, again, loan broker extorting the appraisers to greatly inflate the appraised value. Now, liar's loans are kind of obvious, like the phrase. How many CEOs were prosecuted? Lending CEOs were prosecuted? 0. Absolutely 0. Appraisal fraud is incredibly devastating. There's nothing good about it. There's no, as a prosecutor, you have to think of, well, am I interfering with business? No, you unambiguously help business if you get rid of the fraudsters, right? The honest people are the one, again, the Gresham's dynamic, driven out of the markets by these practices. So this whole thing about, we got to have, pro-business government. This isn't pro-honest business. This is anti-honest business people. This is pro the most elite criminals. So out of that whole great financial crisis, there were virtually no prosecutions of CEOs, and those all, like 2, were special cases, typically involving TARP fraud as opposed to the direct frauds. Come forward. I looked at Fannie and Freddie documents. They make virtually no criminal referrals. By the way, Fannie and Freddie are still in conservatorship. They were put into conservatorship in 2008. That's 17 years, almost to the day, actually. What the hell are they doing in conservatorship? And now Trump, in that role as conservator, not as the regulator of FHFA, this guy is actually the conservator for Fannie and Freddie. That means he, if he wishes to exercise it, has all power of Fannie and Freddie. Collectively, I think they have about $6 trillion in mortgages. It's massive, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Why do we allow a government official 17 years afterwards to exercise this kind of power? And by the way, The Dems, what the hell did they allow this conservatorship to continue forever as well? I think prominent politicians find it really useful. You can reward folks and you can hurt folks and such. Again, we got to stop. We can't not only prevent kings, we've got to prevent these corrupt robber barons simultaneously. If it's just switching which group of robber barons has undue influence, we're not going to get our country back. And we're certainly not going to get what Paul and June and I remember, and we probably all use the same phrase, our Justice Department, when it wasn't an oxymoron.
Oh, well, look, Paul, I got to pick up on that, particularly within the context of the robber barons, especially one that's kind of coming up, not kind of, but as a result of the whistleblowers, so to speak, of the Epstein victims who gathered at the stairs of the Capitol yesterday for the press conference, obviously with Rokana and Massey from Kentucky. And as they're speaking, after being drowned out by the flyover, of course, and everything that was kind of developing from there, the first thing I thought of was you when their attorney Edwards gets to the mic and he says, and I think this is pretty close to what he said. He said, look, we're not going to name names because you just, and you couldn't make up this absurdity, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene speaking as if she's left of the Democrats, right? That we've got to reach above this corruption to be able to foment justice, because all of these whistleblowers, these victims of Epstein, we've got to understand why these people were above the law. And now, of course, I'm assuming, and she said, I'm not afraid to name names. And I'm assuming she's talking about Clinton and Gates and everybody that would be on that side of the ledger. And I saw that picture of Donald Trump as the Joker, laughing over her shoulder. And I was like, how absurd was this? But then here comes Edwards. And the first thing he says is he reiterates why they can't name names, obviously. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, wait, didn't Chase have a settlement where they paid out like $200 million, like 2 years ago in St. Thomas or something to that effect? That's not the point of the question. The point of the question is what Edwards said. He goes, what you, the media, need to start thinking about, if you really want to understand the story, is the FinCEN files. You need to understand what's happening at the SEC, or didn't. You need to understand what didn't happen at the FBI. And then the thing that pops up this morning through Massey is none other than John Paulson. Now, in this context, John Paulson is apparently one of the billionaires that are trying to kneecap Massey's initiative to get the transparency bill to name names and, whatever the records are, the Epstein files, right? But who, of course, is John Paulson? Well, we all know who John Paulson is, and we all know who Goldman is, and we also know who AIG is, and we know who Paul Peltier is. So, Paul, look, you've kind of just addressed this a couple of times, and I'm sorry I keep bringing this conversation and these questions back to you, but that's because everything continues to go to where you've always been, right? So can you please give me some insight on how you're responding to all of these things?
Well, first of all, those problems are the problems of prosecutors following the money and doing their job seem trite in comparison to what's really going on in the justice system right now, right? So yes, and the question that I look at all the time is, do a significant amount of voters actually give a shit about this? Because at the end of the day, unless, and I think we've been talking about this often, is unless it affects directly and hits the voters directly in some way, all of what we're talking about is meaningless. Voters don't seem to care that 500 people were arrested at an American car manufacturing company. Voters don't seem to care that the administration murdered 11 Venezuelans yesterday and accused them of being drug traffickers without any evidence. Americans don't seem to care that they're rounding up people in the district, under the District of Columbia, under the guise of cleaning up the city. It's all bullshit. But what Americans, I think, at the end of the day will care about is, where the fuck do you think Hyundai is going to manufacture cars if they can't do it in the United States? They're going to fucking do it in South Korea. They're going to move out of this country. We already heard yesterday that John Deere, you couldn't be more American than John Deere. They're losing money by the billion, right? Because they can't get parts. They can't service their customers. They laid off 250 employees. So this is, I don't know whether it's South Dakota or Iowa, but it's one of the biggest employers in the state, right? And so that things like that are going to hurt Americans, in the voters, in the pocketbook, right? Farmers, I don't know if you saw the town hall in, I think it was South Dakota or North Dakota, jam-packed with farmers. All of them are losing their shirts, right? That's going to change the voters, I think, and I hope it does. How about these Epstein victims? Two of them said they voted for Trump. How the fuck could you ever think voting for Trump was going to help your cause, right? So I think a lot of these things are not going to affect people until it affects them in the pocketbook. Look, it's happening. We saw today, as you already mentioned, 22,000 jobs created, right? The Obama and the Biden administrations created on average 180,000 jobs a month. This guy has fucked that up so bad with the tariffs and everything else that he's doing. They just revised June downward. We lost 13,000 jobs in June. And he's firing the people who are giving him the numbers, but it's happening out there. So I think we can sit here all day long and talk about how improper it is for this Justice Department to behave this way. But I don't think people give a shit, because it's all doesn't affect them. They're saying things like my sister says, oh, they're putting bad guys in jail. No, they're not. But at the end of the day, people don't register that. So, I think the economic roosters are coming home to roost, and that's what's going to change the dynamic if we have an election midterm.
Well, let me just say this, from the front lines of small business. And I have my small, production company, and we do like a lot of commercial client work and that sort of thing. And this summer, we almost went under because of all the cancellations of projects that happened in May. And why did they happen in May? Because they were in response to the whatever, it's like Trump's big, like what, Liberation Day?
Mhm.
Where all of a sudden they said that they had to hold on to their cash. And, we had projects that were signed, contracted and whatever, to go, that ended up getting canceled because they didn't know if they could spend the money anymore, because they didn't know what to do, given the uncertainty that was being created. And so that's just my small business. And I know that my small business isn't unique. I know that small businesses everywhere were facing very similar circumstances in their own realms all the way back in May. And I know through, personally, that there's been several companies, creative companies, in both Cleveland and Akron, that have gone out of business over the summer. And so whatever the economic indicators are, they're always like lagging behind what the actual lived experience is. It's like we're already in the middle of a horrible economy as far as I'm concerned. And, the job numbers came out, they look bad. And I think, is it September 10th or 11th that the next inflation numbers come out? I'm going to guess that those inflation numbers are going to be high. And, I'm not an economist, but I mean, from what I can tell, I mean, doesn't that basically suggest that we're in a stagflation cycle? And if that's the case, then the pain is going to be coming, and it's going to be coming hard.
Yeah, but Paul's point registered to me like a nuclear frickin' explosion. But he didn't address what I asked him, which is awesome, and I love that. But he brought it back to, we've got a president that's got what, backdoored $5 billion, at least on paper, right? We're talking about all of these methodologies and this insanity. Meanwhile, those guys that did that, we've seen that the oil and gas companies have laid off 13,000 people, or no, they just laid off 13,000 people from dirty fossil fuel industries while they're rolling back regulations. And these guys are making out, and I'm talking about these guys, probably, everybody who's involved in the matrix of the financialization of the machine, the CEOs and, their brokers and blah, blah, blah. They're probably making money hand over fist right now. Right. And so I'm going to bring this, back to you, Bill, because of all of the different hats that you wear. And I'm going to bring it back to John Paulson, because I do remember when you and I spoke to Yanis Varoufakis, it was mind boggling, because we had the knowledge that Paulson comes out of The Big Short. He backs up the Brinks truck for $20 billion. We have inside information, because this was all levied for season 2 of The Con, that they were handpicking all of these liar's loans that they ended up plugging into all of these, securities, I'm assuming Abacus on down the line. Meanwhile, he gets away with it. He becomes this giant, fundraiser for Trump. We all thought he was going to become Treasury Secretary for a short time there. But here he is leveling, influence as one of the robber barons to influence the Epstein files. But he's just a summation of the entire story that we've all been in the midst of. And so what's the question? The question is, yeah, we once had the law, Bill and Paul. We once had guys like you taking down guys like this, that they're doing this with impunity, without any cover. It's out in the open. We can all see it. And yet, to Paul's point, and that is the most important point, and I appreciate he made it, is the fact that nobody cares. Your father came out of the Marines. How many people sacrificed for this country? How many people had blood in the game to be able to free us, in the world from what was at that time to what? Deliver this? I'm sorry to get a little bit of emotional about it, but I'm pissed off, man.
Okay, so first, a friendly amendment. It isn't even that they don't care about these abuses. 22 to 32, and that's the dispute statistically, of them love it. They get joy when people are killed who they view as enemies. They've never met them. They don't need any proof. If the president says it, it's true. That's just the dictatorship playbook. Second, Paul's absolutely right about the incredible job growth under Democratic presidencies. And by the way, my primary appointment was in economics in the academy. But it doesn't have the full flavor. The U.S. wasn't simply doing well. The United States was the driver of the world recovery from the great financial crisis and then from COVID. We were substantially, it was not a small thing, we were substantially the engine that pulled in these 2 very dark times of relatively recent history. So even if we had small positive job growth as opposed to losing jobs, that would not be remotely sufficient. Particularly if you look around the world, folks, very bad things are happening to some of the biggest economies in the world. Japan. You've heard about the lost decade. Japan used to be the 2nd largest economy in the world. And everybody was making book on what year it would exceed the US GDP. Japanese GDP is now 1/4 of the United States GDP. So again, we have to be the engine pulling up this massive economy, which has been crushed for 30 years. An entire generation has known only recession. They didn't call it recession, but it was. obviously Russia is crushed, but it's a, small economy. China has immense problems with fraud and corruption of its own. And again, it's the same thing. You got a party leader that has the power, and you have all kinds of corrupt business people, and they scratch each other's back. There's a famous Chinese phrase for it, these connections and such. Um, and so that's the second largest economy in the world. But the numbers are lies, overwhelmingly. There's not a single publicly traded Chinese corporation that could pass an honest SEC registration. And it's going to hell, right? Right as we speak. People have stopped reproducing in South Korea, Taiwan. They're down in the 0.6 range. These are going to have catastrophic economic effects within a decade. And so we cannot afford, America cannot afford, and the world cannot afford, which means what all of you have been saying is right. Something that used to be the huge driver is now actually falling, and the huge driver globally. So things are going to get bad. And that's without Trump's insanity, right? But there is that insanity. If there were a game and you got to pick your neighbor, international neighbor, everybody in the world would pick Canada. We've managed to piss off the Canadians so much that Las Vegas is crashing. That the folks making bourbon are crashing.
Right.
A whole series of things are already in the pipeline, which is to say they're not in the pipeline, which is it's going to dry up, which is what Paul is describing. So yes, this is going to be horrible. But remember, the dictatorship playbook has, if there's bad times, who do you blame it on? Well, first the Jews, right? But then anybody else that's different. And in the United States context, that's going to be primarily Hispanics and blacks.
Yeah.
And Hispanics still show very substantial support for Trump. And even some polls actually claim he's increased support in recent months.
And when you listen to these farmers, they all say the places that we used to sell, for instance, our soybeans, won't buy them anymore because they've created a new supply chain. Right. So, in other words, China would buy the soybeans from the United States. Now they're buying it from Brazil and once you've broken that supply chain, it is impossible, almost impossible, to get it back. And so they don't have any place to sell their stuff. Never mind the fact that they're losing money.
I think I just saw today too that I think for the first time, Canada has imported more cars from Mexico than they have the U.S.
Can I just one thing short on strategic behavior? Everywhere we have competitors, they are going to their government and their lobbyists are going to their government and saying, F the Americans, right? And start enforcing food quality laws, right? So all kinds of U.S. shipments of goods in the agriculture and meat are being rejected.
Right.
Right. That will increase, and that will be even worse because typically, for example, if you're talking about fresh meat, it gets thrown away when it gets rejected in another country because of obvious hygiene things. So horrific things. Other people play this game too. You can't forget. We say, that the opposition gets a vote. Well, the opposition all over the world, every rival of a U.S. firm, we have just given them the perfect ability to go to their government and get anti-American provisions.
Right.
Again, we already have tariffs higher than Smoot-Hawley. Smoot-Hawley only supercharged things as other countries retaliated, again, because they had merchants with political power. So that's what's coming, folks. It's going to get much worse.
Right.
And,
Right.
and who told us it was coming? Ronald Reagan. Listen to Ronald Reagan. He walked us through all of this.
Well,
And just to put like a button on what both you, Paul, and Bill were saying is that the feeling is that, I mean, because of how supply chains work and everything like that, if today Trump snapped his fingers and reversed everything, it's already broken. They've
What?
already done these things. They've already changed their supply chains. They've already put in these food quality laws and so on. So even if Trump snapped his fingers right now, it wouldn't mitigate the damage.
Lululemon canceled, I understand, 60% of their orders because it's all small packages. And now, because Trump put the tariffs back on small packages, nobody wants to buy the stuff because it's too expensive.
okay, you just identified a bunch of angry women that are going to impact a bunch of men because of their freaking Lululemon. And suddenly now people are going to wake up, I guess, Paul. So,
I'm sorry to say, but men wear Lululemon now too, but that's another story.
so as we're closing up here, I mean, a couple of final thoughts. I mean, look, it's the fall. I mean, all of these major economic gyrations historically have happened in the fall, whether it was the 2008 great financial crisis or the crash of 1929. And this on top of seeing as as Bill had mentioned, the competitors, let's just call it BRICS, but gather in Asia. Of course, we just saw Xi Jinping, we just saw Putin and Modi and, our friend from North Korea. And just that alone, especially in the context of, it seemed like the tariffs, and I've been hearing about a lot of this recently, that Trump was insulted by Modi not, submitting from the Nobel Peace Prize, considering the conflict between India and Pakistan, which is ridiculous, right? So yeah, we got more to discuss, but we're out of time. Thank you guys as always. I'm going to encourage everybody to share, and subscribe. Like, subscribe, share. Please check out the newuntouchables.com. Please check out Corruption Incorporated, The American Way. And of course, please check out thecon.tv. And until next time, guys, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful weekend. Good luck and good night, as they once said. Take care.
Take care.